I want to say hello and good morning to each and every one of you. This is Coffee with Corn, and it's a winter meeting series that's brought to you by the Corn Marketing Program of Michigan. Good morning to each and every one of you. My name is Terry Henney, and Kristen Poley, who's the research manager for the Corn Marketing Program of Michigan, will be here joining us as well, and Kristen will be helping us answer your questions. You'll have the opportunity to field questions, submit questions, and we will field them. Kristen will be taking care of that, and we will be getting those questions to our expert of the day. Now, each week, we're going to be joined by experts from all across the agricultural industry. And they're going to address some of the most important topics and very timely issues that are affecting the industry. And as we go through this over the next 12 weeks, practically every week there is something new that is coming up that many of you should be aware of. And that's what this entire series is designed to do, is to keep you on top of what happens on a weekly basis. And again, provide you with the experts that I think you're going to need to have yourself a really successful year in 2021. Now, this is being simultaneously broadcast on the Michigan Corn Facebook page. Now, if you want to receive your credits, your RUP credits, your CCA credits for the session, you need to register and you need to attend the Zoom meeting so that we can verify your attendance. So remember that if you want to get the credits, you do have to attend the Zoom meeting so we can verify your attendance. Now, you can register online. All you have to do is go to www.micorn.org/events, okay? So mark that down, www.micorn.org/events. Now, we'll have time to answer questions at the end, but you can type your questions in as we go along using the chat or the Q&A functions. Now, if you take a look on your screen, down on the bottom, you'll see Q&A and you'll see chat. So all you've got to do is take your cursor, your little arrow thingy-jiggy, and just click on that and type in the box. Now, if you're watching on Facebook, you can also leave a question in the comments section, okay? So just mark that down. At this time, I'd like to give my space on the screen over to a pretty smart guy. And the nice thing I like about Marty Chilvers is he doesn't talk over your head. He talks right at you. And it's really important that I know you're going to have some questions that you want to ask Marty. So it might be a really good idea to get your fingers limbered up so you can type in those questions. Marty earned his bachelor's in ag science degree with honors and a PhD from the University of Tasmania, Australia, with subsequent postdoctoral training at Washington State University. Dr. Chilvers leads a field crop pathology program encompassing both basic and applied research on diseases of soybean, corn, wheat, barley, dry bean, and hemp. Dr. Chilvers has been at Michigan State for since 2008. Not 2008 years, Marty. I think there's some trees out west that are a little bit younger than that.
Sorry.
But he's been around MSU for quite a while. At this time, I want to turn the space over to Dr. Martin Chilvers. Marty, good morning.
Good morning, Terry. Thanks for the introduction. I guess I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here, and then we'll have some discussion about TaskSpot. And as Terry was saying, if you have any questions, please see out. Okay, so that should be good then. You should be seeing my screen. All right, so what lessons did we learn from the 2020 TaskSpot trials and what happened this season, I guess? So let's talk a bit about that, and just really quickly a short introduction, just in case you're not familiar with TaskSpot. It looks like tar has been flecked onto the plant, It's caused by a fungus, Phyllachora. Maydis is the name of that fungus, and that doesn't really matter, right? We've got that tar spot as the disease name. In terms of the disease cycle, then each one of those little tar spots, this is what that looks like when it's blown up underneath the microscope. This is a cross section through a leaf. And so essentially every one of those little black spots becomes a fungal reproductive structure. So the tar spot fungus is forming spores, and it makes these little areas where it produces those spores inside the corn leaf. And it produces pigment around it too. So they're dark in color, right? That helps protect it from UV light and drying out. And so it produces a whole bunch of these spores, and then they're pushed up onto the corn leaf, and then that gets rain splashed or dispersed onto other plants to continue the disease. So the disease cycle is pretty simple, really. We know that it can survive on infected corn debris. So we've collected corn debris from Michigan and looked for those spores, and we found those spores still inside the plant. And then they, at the start of the season, they're going to splash up onto the plant or be blown in onto into a field, and then start creating the symptoms that you see. And then the disease cycle from when a spore lands on that to when you see that black tar spot structure and releasing more spores is about 2 to 3 weeks. So it's pretty quick. Like once this thing gets going, it can really explode very quickly. And so that's part of our problem, right? We get very, very rapid development of the disease. In 2020, the 2020 season was similar to 2019 in that it was fairly dry during the season for the most part. Maybe not at the start, especially in 2019. I know we had a lot of issues at planting, but during the growing season, July and August in particular, it was pretty dry for most of the Midwest, I guess. And so that really slowed the development of tar spot this year. And so this map, what you're looking at is in gray, the counties that have been confirmed with tar spot previously. And in yellow, those that we heard reports of tar spot being present this year. And then maybe a couple we've missed off, and it doesn't really matter. What we're trying to do here is just get a sense of where it is in the US now. We know it's pretty much across all of the lower half of Michigan. There's some counties around Detroit there. If we find a cornfield or sweet corn, it's probably going to have, tar spot on it now. It has certainly moved north, a little bit further north. So my colleague in Wisconsin saw that it was moving north. So I fully expected to reach out, into the Dakotas in the coming years. And this year, that's something we did export to Canada. So it's made its way into Ontario there, and you can find that. The one that was sort of somewhat interesting, I mean, it's not great, but it was interesting, is that one out in Pennsylvania. So we don't know how it got there, but maybe there's other locations along the way that have been missed. I know Ohio is a little, didn't do a whole bunch of this mapping this year, and that's fine. But it's out and about, and you can see Indiana's pretty much all covered as well. Just something that's sort of interesting. This was sent to me from a BASF rep from I think it was a hay auction in Iowa, I believe. And so you can see, there's potential for long distance movement of this if we're moving any corn debris around. So, I mean, it's always good to try and clean equipment, right? It might not be tar spot, it might be nematodes, it might be other things you're moving around, but some good hygiene, if possible, is important, not just for tar spot, but for any other diseases and issues that might be out in our fields. So I just want to recognize a couple of students we've got working on this. Emily is doing more sort of lab focused resistance type work, looking at different corn lines that have resistance. And then Jill, who's been looking at a lot of the weather parameters and doing some work with spore traps to try and understand when this disease is starting in the season and when we should put our fungicides on. So as I sort of started saying, we were drier than normal in July and August. And so here's a monthly summary for July of 2020. And we were below normal precip for most of Michigan. There certainly were areas though that were a little bit above that. And I was called out to a field on the east side of Ionia, and I know Jim had a call from someone on the west side of Ionia where they had sort of elevated task spot levels. And I wonder if, that's just because we had sort of timely rainfall events or rainfall events, in those areas. And here's August 2020. So you're above normal precipitation. So I guess one of the points I want to make here is that if we have a lot of rainfall events in 2021, we will see more of this disease, right? Because leaf wetness is really important. It's really important for the fungus because it needs that moisture to germinate its spores and infect the plant and then release more spores. So whenever we get rainfall or if we irrigate, that increases our chances of seeing the disease. Okay, so I'm going to start talking now about some field trial work that we did. So this is an aerial shot of some work that we had down at Decatur, Michigan, so in Van Buren County, Southwest Michigan. This part of the field here, you can see a whole bunch of different germplasm. We're working with Addie Thompson here on campus to look at corn diversity panel, basically. So she's got, I think, like 400 lines that she's looking at, and we're trying to find lines that have better resistance to this disease to identify new resistance genes. And then on this side of the trial here, we have both hybrid, like commercial hybrid screening, and fungicide trials and some other things that we're looking at in terms of disease management. We chose this particular field because in 2018 they didn't have any disease on this farm. 2019 though, I saw it move in late in the season and it was pretty significant, and it's irrigated as well, so that increases our chances of seeing disease, and we certainly saw it this year in 2020. Before I show you that, I'm just going to show you two different sort of measures of how we go about measuring how much task spot is out there, right? When we're out there walking the fields, how do we get a sense of how much disease is there? There's a couple of different numbers we talk about, and it doesn't matter if you don't get all this, it's really not that important, but just for those that are interested, it might be kind of neat. So one is disease incidence. And so that is how many plants are infected. Okay, so in this diagram here, I've got 4 corn plants, but only 2 of those have any task spot on them. So 2 out of 4, that'd be 50% disease incidence, right? Then the other type of measure we use is disease severity. And this is a cartoon of a corn leaf here. And this computer program is actually a training aid that we use to figure out like, what is 15%, what is 5%, what does that look like? And so this is showing you what 15% would look like. So if 15% of that corn leaf has task spot lesions on it, we would say it's got a disease severity of 15%. Now, very often we multiply the incidence by the severity to come up with what we call a disease severity index. And so in this example, we've got a 50% disease incidence. We're multiplying that by a disease severity of 15, and that gives us a 7.5 out of 100 disease severity index. And that's just a compilation of both of those scoring methods. And this is what that actually looks like in the field. I asked my students, so do you have any photos of what that sort of looked like? And so this is the Decatur field, and she put into her math, this was showing a disease severity of 15. Very often in a field, we'll get to 100% disease incidence pretty quickly. So most of those plants will have disease on them. It might not be much, but there'll be disease on most of those plants, and that'll occur pretty quickly. So most of the time, a lot of the disease severity index is really driven by the disease severity, like it is in this case here. So 100% disease incidence times by that 15% equals the 15 disease severity index, okay? So this year and last year, what we did is work with Manny Singh he's an MSU agronomist, and we looked at disease development at 6 different locations, I believe it is, around the state. And we've got 2 different measures there, and that's why I just took the time to show you what a disease incidence is and a disease severity. So these circular points here, these lines that hit 100, that's disease incidence, so the number of plants in those particular fields that had disease. And then disease severity is down here in these triangles at the bottom. the graphic. So the red one here is that Decatur location. And it, like I was saying, it can go from virtually nothing to most plants being infected very quickly. So we detected disease, I believe it was 17th of July, but that was only 1 or 2 spots in like 10 acres. And we had 4 people walking around and looking very carefully for this thing. And then by the end of July, the start of August, we had most of those plants, pretty much every plant had some level of disease, but it was very, very low, just 1 or 2 spots here or there. In terms of other locations, we had in blue here, this is our campus location. It was actually irrigated as well. And we put some of that tar spot debris, infected debris from last year into that field to push up disease. And we saw it pick up pretty quickly there as well. And then Branch was the only other location that, well, one of the other locations that exploded, that developed disease quickly as well. Montcalm and then Ottawa were very, very slow. And Lenawee, we'd never detected disease in that particular field. In terms of how much disease was there, really, again, that Decatur location was the one that was really lit up the most, right? And it might not be as dramatic, but that triangle, the red triangle line here is showing you the amount of disease severity. So how bad each plant is infected at Decatur. And it was bad, right? I think the score of 20 is pretty significant. I don't know whether we actually reach higher than that with this particular scoring method. And then you can see there's other locations, Ingham and Ottawa were the couple that sort of developed, but very, very late in the season compared to Decatur. So we did a number of things at Decatur then. One of those was a hybrid performance trial, so just screening commercial germplasm for companies. We planted it on the 4th of May, and as I said, there was no tar spot in the field that we could find prior to July 17th. And typically, I think the earliest we've ever found it is early July. I don't think anyone's really found it in June before. But we didn't find it until July 17th at R1, and it was very, very low at that point in time. So here's, I think we have 15 different hybrids here. I'm just sort of showing you how much disease is on those plants over time. And so we started rating these on the 31st of July, came back and did another rating sort of late August, and then another one in September. And so you can see that there's some differences in those different hybrids as to how much disease they get and sort of maintain during the season. So we've got some lines here that have better resistance to the disease than others. And I've just keyed them in here by the days to maturity. So I'm going to keep that company information confidential, but that's just sort of demonstrating to you that there's differences, right, in germplasm. So it's really, really important when you're making variety hybrid selection that you talk to your seed dealer and get the best information you can. Everyone's scrambling to get the best information they can, and that's why we're working with some of these companies to screen material too. One other sort of scientific type thing we'll just talk about real quick here is area under the disease progress curve. So essentially you can see here, we've got a blue area and a green area, right? And that blue area is much bigger than that green area. And so this is another way of us measuring disease, and it allows us to measure disease over the course of the whole season, because that's important, because we want, for optimal corn development, we want to maximize photosynthesis during the whole season, right? So the more disease that we have for a longer period is going to reduce that photosynthesis. So if we had a corn hybrid, for this particular example, we'd want the one that develops the least amount of disease over the least amount of time. So we'd want that corn hybrid that had that sort of green profile, as opposed to that blue profile that has a lot more disease, right? So this is a graph then of disease area over the course of the whole season, area under disease progress curve compared to the yield for those different hybrids. And so the higher we go on this y-axis here, the more disease we have, and the less yield. So the numbers are going to be to the left. And the less disease we have, the lower we are, the more yield we were typically seeing. And we were seeing that tar spot predicted about 30% of the final yield. So there's a lot of other factors, right? Is this hybrid suited to these sandy grounds? Does it perform well under irrigation? You know, there's a whole bunch of other factors that go into yield. But the amount of disease, tar spot disease, influenced yield by about 30%, which is pretty significant, right? So again, what I'm trying to do here is to get you to think about hybrid selection. That's a very, very important piece. Oh, wrong way. Again, comparing the area under disease progress curve to moisture, grain moisture at harvest. I thought this was pretty telling. Now we've got like a 70% sort of prediction of how dry that grain is going to be. So the more disease, the drier that grain is, right? So we're down to about 18, 19% when we've got a lot of disease there. And, you know, up to, 23% moisture when we've got a lot less disease. So when we get a lot of tar spot, that's the other thing that happens. The plants senesce or they die much quicker when they've got a lot of disease there, right? And that can lead to other issues like stalk integrity and lodging issues. And it can also reduce kernel weight and affect test weight and those sorts of things, which is also a problem. One of the things that we did was to try and look at fungicide timing. I think this is going to be a really important key to the best management of this issue. And so what I've got here is that disease index and scoring that over time. And so we came in here, we used Trivapro because in 2019 it was the only labeled product, and we followed that up with the second year of this particular trial. And we came in and we sprayed at different times, and we also have an untreated check in here as well. So the light blue line is the untreated check, so that never received a fungicide. And you can see that the amount of disease in that untreated plot, coming to the surface here. So certainly the untreated plot had the most amount of disease here in late August, and was one of the ones that had the highest disease in early September there. So this is looking at the amount of disease on the ear leaf and the ear leaf only, okay? I just want to point that out because don't take this as like, oh, I've got to spray at R4, that's what I'm going to do next year. That's not what I'm telling you. What we're trying to do here is figure out when is the best time to spray, and it's going to change from year to year depending on how much tar spot pressure there is, okay? So that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of here. So I've labeled some of these plots to try and, some of these lines to try and just make it a bit easier to interpret, because I know the lines are stacked on top of each other. But essentially what we saw, the most amount of disease developed on the untreated, the V8, the V11, and the R1 fungicide timing, right? The next lowest set of lines were R2 and R3 fungicide timing. And after that, the V8 plus R1, so 2 fungicide applications. And then below that, we had R5. But if we look back at the R5 line, it actually had a pretty significant amount of disease at the end of August. So even though R5 looks the cleanest at the end of the season, it's definitely not the timing I would recommend, because you've got more disease develop in August. And so thinking about that disease area over the course of the season, right, that's bad. It may have kept that ear leaf a little bit cleaner, but it's still really not good, okay? The one that was surprising to us was that R4 treatment, okay? So that had one of the lowest amounts of disease towards the end of August there, and it stayed the cleanest into September. And so, again, this was just looking at the ear leaf. Very unfortunately, we had enough field variation in this particular trial, we weren't able to pull meaningful yield data. We have yield data, but it didn't break out. But it really sort of makes me think that we should have, if I was the farmer trying to manage tar spot at Decatur, I probably should have waited until the R3, maybe the R4 growth stage before spraying. Because I think if I'd sprayed it, definitely if I'd sprayed earlier, the vegetative timings, I think that's too early. And I think we have enough data now to show that those vegetative timings are typically going to be too early, okay? R1 is still a good timing, and I'm not saying it's not, it's a bad timing, but if you really wanted to optimize it, and you have the flexibility if you have your own equipment, or if you have the potential to actually, finely tune that aircraft application, maybe we want to wait until a little bit later in the season, again, depending on how disease is developing. So what we're trying to do here is develop a tar spot disease threshold. So I think if we're out in the field, we're walking around looking for a tar spot, if we've only got 1 in 100 plants infected, so that'd be 1% of the plants infected, I would personally wait and watch on that front. And I wouldn't necessarily spray right then and there. I think I would, if I had one fungicide application timing, I would wait and watch, okay? I think once we get 50% of plants infected at the ear leaf or above, I think we should definitely pull the trigger then, right? And I realize that there are hurdles to getting across all of the fields that we have with equipment or scheduling planes. So that's definitely a piece of the conversation that needs to come in here. But I think for most years, the optimal timing is going to be somewhere between R1 and R4, okay? So that's what I really want you to sort of take home from this. I'm going to show you another trial here. This is just comparing some fungicide products. We have a number of different trials that we conducted. This is a nice one just because in this part of the field, we had very low field variability, so we're able to get some good yield data. And I know that's really important. Obviously, it's really, really important to you all, but it's just, the yield broke out really nicely in this particular trial. And so, again, you know, I'm not saying R1 is useless. You know, it's okay to spray it. It's still, if that's the only option you have, it's still going to provide you some level of control. And I'm going to show you why that is. So all treatments applied here, we used non-ionic surfactants, and we sprayed them at R1 on July 17th. And remember, disease only just showed up, right? So it's to my liking, it's on the early side, but hey, that's what we did just to compare products. And this is what we found. So again, just showing you that disease progress over time, right? We've got this untreated in light blue again. And you can see that that's one that ended up highest at the end of August and at the end of the season there too. And then essentially all of these other products did a really good job at suppressing disease into late August. But then after that, you know, the disease starts to climb pretty quickly, right? Again, going back to that disease under the progress curve, this is what we saw. So this is essentially the same information I was just showing you in that previous slide, but just into a single value for each of those different products, right? So untreated check and basically showing you that all of those different products were able to reduce the amount of tar spot that developed over the season. This was really, really mind-blowing to me, and I should change this scale so that it's more impactful to you. So this is doing a push test out of 10 stalks. So this is 70% of the stalks breaking in our untreated check. So to me, that's just incredible. We had very, very favorable harvest conditions this year, right? Us personally, we weren't battling rain or snowfall down at that location, so we were able to get it off October 7th, no issues. If we had have had, you know, significant snowfall event or heavy, strong winds, you know, maybe it would have made harvest a lot more difficult because a lot of the plots would have fallen over. But to me, this was incredible. So a lot of those fungicide products definitely reduced the amount of, reduced the number of plants that we're going to lodge. So the Veltima and Delaro were a couple that looked really good, but certainly all of those products definitely reduced the amount of disease that was affecting the stalks. We had better stalk integrity scores. So that was really, really impressive to me. And then the other thing, of course, is yield. I'll give you a second on this slide. Essentially what we're seeing here from the untreated check, we're seeing about a 25 to a 50 bushel protection from that R1 fungicide timing. That Delaro here, Delaro plus Luna privilege, we're essentially trying to simulate a Delaro complete, which is the newest version of Delaro. But all of those products certainly provided protection and yield protection in the order of 25 to 50 bushels. And the numbers are going to vary here. If we look at another trial, Miravis Neo might look a little bit better. This is just one trial, so don't I think this is really, really good data, but we need to look at many trials to make better recommendations on these products. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention is that we've been looking at the effect of nitrogen, so laying down different amounts of nitrogen, high and low nitrogen. Last year and this year, we see no difference there. So I think really the recommendation from a fertility perspective is do what you should be doing for good corn growth, right? Don't starve your corn, don't overfeed it, do what you should be doing for good corn production. And that's really, I think, the best piece of advice at this point in time. There may be things that come out with more data, but just by us putting on different amounts of nitrogen, we didn't see any differences in task spot development. The one thing that was really interesting to us last year and had also panned out this year as well, so the same trends that we saw, was that it's really low plant populations, we see more disease develop. So this particular trial data set is from Decatur as well. So we're looking at a more resistant line and a more susceptible line. And so you can see the more susceptible line definitely, had a lot more disease develop than the more resistant line. But if you look at the number of plants out there, so 28,000, 34, 40, and 46, those higher plant populations developed less task spot over the course of the season. And same on the susceptible, right? So we've got 28, 34, 40, and 46. So good news for seed salesmen, I guess, right? Make sure you plant, plant appropriately. I wouldn't necessarily recommend cranking up the planting population because you've got to look at the economics of, how much seed you're putting down and everything. So again, I would probably follow the agronomic recommendations for maximizing yield there. But it was really interesting and we need to do some more work just to get to the bottom of why that is. We're trying to understand, exactly why we see more disease at lower plant populations. It might be something due to earlier dew formation at that lower plant density. It may also be something to do with more open canopy and more rain splash and those sorts of things. We will be putting up a fungicide efficacy or an updated fungicide efficacy for control of corn diseases at this website. So this is a multi-state website. So all my university colleagues at the land grants, we work together at this website, Crop Protection Network. And we've got articles out there on TaskSpot too, if you wanted to do more reading. But this is going to have a handy chart, and we're going to rank those different fungicide products for their efficacy for controlling northern leaf blight, grey leaf spot, and tar spot and other diseases. So just something to mention. And this is my final slide, and then we'll open it up for questions. So the tar spot risk factors and management. So weather is key, right? So in 2018, we had a lot of rainfall during the season. And this photo in this bottom right is from a field in central Michigan from 2018. And it was just smoked with tar spot, right? Again, we had a lot of very regular rainfall. For those folks up in the thumb that might be listening today, we haven't had that much tar spot pressure develop up that area. Maybe down to sort of the base of the thumb, Saginaw, there's a few fields that are starting to light up now, but Huron County, it's there, but it's not to the levels that it was devastating this year. 2021 might be a different story, so we just have to see how that plays out, but weather is a really important factor here. And then in terms of management, hybrid resistance is going to be your next go-to tool, right? Just like any disease, really, selecting the best variety that has a good disease resistance package. And then I think, scouting for well-timed fungicide application, and that's typically going to fall between R1 and R4. I wouldn't typically, go much later than that. There's been, some potential maybe at certain times to maybe go a bit later than that, but I'd be very careful of that. Crop rotation and residue management are really, they're low on the list, right? In fact, I probably should move scouting for lodging potential up above those. So we've had plenty of fields that have been rotated or never been in corn before that have been smoked with tar spot. Certainly crop rotation is important, and you should be doing it for management of other issues, insect pests and other things too. But it appears to play a pretty low role in controlling the disease, and same with residue management, so tillage versus no-till. And that's probably because this disease appears to be so easily transmitted on the wind, right? It appears that it's moving many, many miles during the course of the season. So you can do all the best management practices you can on your farm, and it's not going to eliminate the potential for it to blow in from potentially other counties. So that's that's the issue with crop rotation and residue management. And then, you know, scout for lodging potential, like we just talked about with that fungicide trial, that's another really, really big risk here, right? So I would, at the end of the season, get out, just check your fields for the amount of tar spot, and certainly harvest those fields that are at risk for lodging earlier than those that look like they're going to stand pretty well. And that's what I've got. So I'd be very happy now to take questions.
Hey, Marty, thank you very much. That was very informative, very interesting. Kristen Poley, who's our research manager. Kristen, I see that we have a number of questions. You want to direct us through some of those right now?
Absolutely. Marty, thank you so much for that presentation full of excellent information. The Corn Marketing Program is proud to have supported your research for the past couple of years, and we really appreciate your and your students' hard work on trying to manage this pest. So yes, we do have a lot of questions coming into the Q&A box and in the chat. If you have questions, please drop them there. We'll also be monitoring the Facebook comments for questions as well. Marty, let's start with, was Decatur the only irrigated location that you were working with this year, and how or why does irrigation promote disease?
Right, it wasn't. There were a number of other locations that were irrigated this season. I think we had 3 of the 4, I should mark these up. Branch was, Decatur, Ingham, Lenawee was not, Montcalm was not, Ottawa was. So irrigation certainly increases risk, but it's not the be all and end all, right? So Ottawa, you know, we thought that might be in an area that may have a lot of tar spot pressure, and it certainly is. So I was sort of wondering if that location might develop a lot of disease. It was late planted, and so that might have been a reason, you know, maybe for a little bit less. But though, I think the primary reason out that area is that during the season, they were very dry for some of those critical periods in July and August, even though they were irrigating. So it's not, you know, irrigation is not the only factor. It's a very, very important piece. And certainly in Lenawee, it was very dry out in that part of the state this year.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions from multiple people asking about row spacing. Is there any information on row spacing compared to susceptibility to tar spot or row width affecting disease rate?
That's a really good question. I do not know of any studies looking at that. That'd be really cool to try and set something up. I think essentially at, you know, if you're at 20-inch row spacing, and I guess the bulk of people here are going to be either like 30s or 20s, 22s. I think at that 20-inch row spacing, that the risk is, when we're talking about the amount of disease developing too, right? It's not that planting of that higher plant population eliminated disease. It's definitely not the case. But there's some trends there. I think what's going to happen if you're at 30-inch compared to a 20-inch planting, you're going to develop more at that 30-inch than the 20-inch. Whether that's going to have an impact on yield is a whole other story, right? And so we're still early days on that data. So again, plant what is agronomically recommended for good corn production, right? Don't go changing plant populations. And I certainly wouldn't rush out and buy different equipment to change row widths. That's definitely not worth the investment at this point in time.
Marty, we have a request. Can you put the slide back up showing the data on your push test while we answer some other questions?
Of course, yeah. There's that push test. And remember, right, this is out of 10 stalks. So we ran across and pushed 10 stalks per plot, and we did like, I think 4 or 5 replicates, so 40 or 50 stalks per data point. So, and this is like nearly 70%, right? It's 68% of the stalks broke.
We are not seeing that slide.
Oh, sorry, I probably need to reshare or something because I stopped sharing. Sorry, folks. Don't know why it does that, it's annoying. There you go.
Yep.
Set up now? Yep.
We see it now. Yeah.
Good. Sorry. So
All right.
yeah, so the untreated is nearly 70%.
Is there any attempt to correlate the Michigan EnviroWeather Network leaf wetness data to scouting or spray timing? I know you were working with some in-plot moisture levels at some point. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's going to be one of the key things, like linking this weather data to disease risk. So there's two factors to sort of remember. So do you have task spot disease pressure or not? So that's going to be a key driver there. But yes, that is something we're looking at. And actually one of the students there was a technician for MORN, for that Ag Weather Network for a couple of years. And so she's very in tune with how those MORN weather stations are set up. And I'm really excited to have her working on this project. And so that is part of our plan at this point. And the bigger efforts too are we're working with our colleague at University of Wisconsin. And he developed the Sporecaster app for white mold. We worked with them, developed, sent data to them and whatnot. And so he's got a model that he's testing. At the moment, it was under predicting the amount of risk for us this year. And last year it over predicted. So it's something that we're still fine tuning, but that is the intention, to develop a smartphone app that will be able to use weather data to predict the amount of disease risk. But we're just too early to start pushing that out at this point. It's just not accurate enough for my liking to start promoting that yet. And it's not, not available to everyone yet, but we hope it will be within the next year or two.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions that are going back to the different chemistries that you've already talked about. Could you just give maybe one or two sentences to reiterate the chemistries that you were looking at and what conclusions you came to?
Yeah, okay, so I've just pulled up a different slide. Chris Kruger was asking a slide there about, different classes of chemistry, right? I didn't show you this particular trial data just because I don't have yield data. Well, I have yield data, but it didn't break out statistically. And again, that's just because there's some field variability there, right? We had a little bit of firing. I don't know exactly what was driving that, but there was enough field variability that we weren't able to get excellent yield data to show you, like I just did in that other trial that we ran in the same field. So this is sort of getting at Chris's question here. So I'd run a trial back in 2018 as well, and we saw that headline didn't perform as well as a triazole or the probably Delaro, some sort of mix of a triazole and a strobe. But in this particular trial, we've got those products out here. I think, strobe still have a place, right? So headline here, and that's just a strobe, did certainly suppress the amount of disease developing, right? So there's definitely activity. I think my only thought on that really though is I think mixed mode of actions makes a lot of sense to me in terms of fungicide risk development. Because this fungus produces a lot of spores during the season and the disease explodes so much, I am pretty concerned about fungicide resistance development. So I prefer you to use a mixed fungicide product, mixed mode of action. So most of our products now have 2, and a lot of products are now moving to 3 modes of action in the mix as well. So, that's pretty much, a lot of the options that are marketed now as well. And that's certainly the direction I would lean, whether SDHIs or triazoles. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, and it comes down to then how much of that product is in the jug, how much of the active ingredient. There's a bunch of other things to sort of consider, but this is sort of what we were seeing. There's definitely, a straight strobilurin still has a place, but I would be just sort of cautious of that resistance issue. To me, the bigger point is really fungicide timing too. I think that's where we've got to spend more time trying to fine tune that a bit more. We've
got a couple of questions questions going back to irrigation. One is, if you're going to irrigate, are there any recommendations? And the second is thoughts on fungicide application through irrigation.
Yeah, so irrigation management, you want to try and irrigate to minimize the leaf wetness. Obviously, you're going to get the canopy wet, right, if you're irrigating with most standard pivot setups. I am really interested in looking at drop nozzles. It's hard to do that sort of research. What we'd really need is someone, a cooperator that was willing to maybe change out part of a pivot, put some drop nozzles where we're not, overhead irrigating the whole corn and just getting some of these drop nozzles down to sort of minimize leaf wetness. That would be a really good test of that particular idea. I know there are other issues with that, but that would be something that would be interesting to look at. So essentially, we have a project at the moment with someone from ag engineering, and what we're trying to do there is really maximize your irrigation efficiency. So we don't want you irrigating twice a week if you could have done it with a single irrigation application once, right? The fewer leaf wetness events you have, the better. So if your soil will hold an inch of water, better to put that down in one go than to put it down in two goes with half an inch applications. Whenever you're doing that, you're increasing the number of times that the leaf is wet for, and that's going to lead to more disease. The other sort of anecdotal piece of this is, if there's options to if the pivot is manageable, you might be better off starting that irrigation early in the morning when we're already forming a dew on that canopy, say maybe 5 a.m. and then running that into the daylight and then shutting it off once we've hit the day. That'd reduce disease or leaf wetness and reduce disease compared to beginning irrigation, say 8, 9 o'clock at night, and that leaf moisture is more likely to hang on that plant for a longer period of time. And we've seen certainly evidence of that in areas of the state.
Let's go back to residue management. You mentioned residue management not being an excellent choice for managing tar spot, but can you talk a little bit more specifically about types of tillage? For example, moldboard plowing to eliminate disease versus something like vertical tillage? Right.
So, yeah, we certainly don't want you to be moldboard plowing right from the soil conservation side of things. And I guess that's something that you could talk on as well, right, Kristen? It's soil health. So the problem is it doesn't eliminate disease, right? So I've had numerous growers come up to me and talk to me about fields that they've never had in corn before. They planted it in corn in 2019, and then it got lit up with tar spot. So the problem is this disease is moving around, right? So spores are blowing in from other fields, and that's just going to bring in inoculum. So you can try and do everything right in terms of, back 20 years ago, we recommended moldboard plowing to bury that residue, get it broken down, try and reduce some of that disease potential. But it just doesn't eliminate disease. And we've certainly had fields that have been corn on corn, no till. And, 2018, we had a lot of tar spot. 2019, didn't really see it. So again, it really comes down to the weather. I think the weather is a far bigger driver than the residue management we're doing in a particular field, unfortunately.
Let's go back to, here's a question on a secondary application. So have there been any second applications mid to late August seeing any yield advantage after you take into consideration application costs?
Yes, and I think probably the best data set actually came from, I think it was Jason Roth from Winfield. So he'd put some small plots out last year, sprayed really late, probably at the R4, maybe the beginning of R5. And he actually saw, I think, a 20 bushel protection when he did that. And I think the reason was disease was late to get started at that particular location last year. So yes, definitely a second application can be beneficial. Yeah, you've got to be very careful though, right? You're really starting to put some money down, especially if you're putting 2 applications on. And so what we're trying to do at this point in time is really try and figure out, if you're going to put 1 application, what is the best timing for that? But certainly if we have enough disease pressure, yes, it could potentially pay. Obviously the chances that paying are a lot less than a single well-timed application, right? And so that's the real challenge we have at this point in time. And we can come in this season, the 2021 season, and repeat this trial and maybe see something a bit different, right? Because the weather's been different, and so we get disease start earlier or later, right? And so maybe the single application is better at R1 as opposed to what I was telling you, maybe at R3, R4 in this particular field. So this is part of our challenge.
Definitely a challenging question. Speaking of timing, can you please show the slide or a slide that shows the figure on your timing again, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, so we obviously got the dates along the bottom and the relative growth stages. So I put a big red arrow there, right? So that's where we first saw disease. And I think most of you probably wouldn't have seen that amount of disease. We had, I think, 4 different people walking through a 10-acre area, and they only found 1 or 2 spots on the plant, right? So there's very, very little disease at mid-July there. And so, yeah, the best timing for the ear leaf, at least, looked to be the R4 fungicide timing. I think generally what's going to happen is that most of our best timings are probably going to range between R1 to R3. I think there's going to be occasional years where, R4 might be better. And I think one of the challenges we have here too is that we've got, at least a 2-month period that we're trying to control disease. If we're talking about vegetables, grapes, anything like that, they're spraying almost weekly, right? Because they have a much higher value crop, and so they've got the margins there to support that. So the real challenge for us as field crop producers is making the most of that single fungicide timing and really maximizing that return on investment.
Let's talk about disease from year to year, going back again to tillage, but this time no-till and also including a cover crop. Are there certain cover crops that could be a refuge for tar spot, and how could any cover crop impact next year's corn crop?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Yeah, this is a really good question. So as far as we know, tar spot is only specific to corn. There are other tar spot-like diseases that affect other grass species. And we've been collecting some of that from field edges. But so far, all of that appears to be a different species. It's not the same thing that's causing the tar spot on corn. So certainly if you're growing any sort of broadleaf, it should be absolutely fine. We see no evidence for a tar spot on wheat, sorghum, or I guess cereal rye either. So I think any of those should be fine, or any of the cover crops rather should be fine. I guess the advantage to growing a cover crop might be that if you're in a no-till situation, you grow a cover crop, you might help reduce the spores, leaving that corn residue out into your new corn field. But as I said, this thing is moving across the landscape, and so you can do everything great in your particular field or farm. That doesn't mean that it's not going to blow in from outside. There's just a lot of corn in the state, right? What, 2 million acres, and so there's yeah, you can do everything great, and it's still potentially going to move in.
And can you physically transfer spores just by walking from field to field or equipment? Is that a possibility?
I think it's possible. I think it is possible for sure. But I think that's going to be a pretty, pretty low risk, in terms of scouts and whatnot. I think the risk is pretty low there, because you're only moving a very small amount. I think a lot more of it, acres and acres and acres, right, of potential spores are moving on the wind. And so, yes, there's potential for moving it around on clothing and machinery. What I'm more concerned about is that long distance movement of pathogens, right? I mean, the cat is out of the bag for tar spot in Michigan. We're not really going to do anything about that. If we're maybe thinking about California's sweet corn market, and I know nothing about that, I'd be very concerned about bringing any equipment from the Midwest out to California and having residue, corn residue on that and being taken out there and then potentially starting tar spot out that part of the country. And that's, you know, that's potentially maybe how tar spot got to the US. It's not seed borne, but you know, perhaps there's been a little bit of leaf residue or something moved around in shipments of seed, and that may be how it got here, or maybe on clothing, right? That's the potential. And it was sort of native to Central America. Just quickly as well, Jason Roth is on the line, on the call as well. And he repeated his trials I was talking about in 2020. And that second application's provided at best 10 bushel, he was saying. So nothing like his 2019. I wish I had his slide deck here. I just don't have it up. But so yeah, just to that point about that second application, it doesn't always work out, right? That if conditions are really favorable for tar spot, yes, you know, it might be worth putting on that second application, but it's very sort of specific.
We have just a few minutes in our official time left, but we'll keep going with questions for a little while longer. Keep asking your questions in the chat and the Q&A, and if we don't get to them, we will have them answered after we are finished broadcasting today. Marty, do you have a recommendation, or do you recommend shortening the maturity of the normal hybrid selection to avoid late tar spot disease pressure?
No. So that was another reason why I put this slide up here too. We went through a lot of data, right? And I get it. There's quite a bit of stuff there. So why I labeled these plots with the days to maturity is just to sort of emphasize that. So I think what is important is to do what is recommended for best corn production in your part of the state, right? If you need to be growing a 99-day, go ahead and do that. If you should be growing 109-day, go ahead and do that, right? So this graphic here, what I'm showing you is a number of data points where 99-day corn this is the moisture at harvest anyway, it's the same thing. Here's the yield data I meant to show. So some 99-day varieties, yeah, they mature quicker, but it certainly didn't reduce the amount of disease that developed, right? So this 99-day actually developed the most amount of disease. This one would have been the second one that developed the most amount of disease compared to some of these other varieties. And there are other you know, short day corn that's fine. And I'm not recommending going to a long day variety either, right? Now you'll be into other issues. And another very small component of this, I know it sort of muddies the water a little bit. Some of these early maturing varieties may have been showing a little bit more disease because they were starting to senesce naturally. And then when the corn plant starts to finish up the end of the season, it's sort of going to give up the ghost and develop more tar spot, right? And so we may actually be scoring those a little bit higher than what is, than maybe some of these longer day maturity hybrids. So no, the answer is talk to your seed dealer, make sure you're planting the correct days to maturity corn, try and plant a couple of different varieties at least to try and spread the risk, and just try and find that variety or the hybrid that has the best resistance package.
That's good advice, thank you. In addition to leaf wetness, is temperature generally a function for the development of tar spot?
It certainly is going to be a function, absolutely. We're still working through that. You know, why is it that we don't see tar spot in June? Is it too cold? Maybe, or maybe it's just, you know, it's there, but it's so hard to find because it's, you know, a needle in a haystack type thing, right? Until more disease develops. I think that's definitely a factor. I think really really hot conditions, we're going to see less of it. Again, I think the temperature also drives leaf wetness, right? We have a lot of heat, we may have less dew forming on those plants during the night. So it's also a factor, you know, temperature is somewhat tied to other moisture components. But yes, temperature will be a component. I think the most important is going to be leaf wetness though.
Marty, you've looked at nutrient management a little bit in relation to tar spot. We have a question here asking about, do you recommend applying KTS and or copper as a side dress in relation to tar spot?
No, not at this point in time. We haven't, I haven't tested those. I'd be surprised if there was any effect from those. I'd be very happy to take any recommendations or things that you've all been hearing about, you know, what is a good management tactic. But no, like we don't recommend that as a management and don't have any data to support or refute it really at this point in time. But I'd be very surprised if that had a significant impact on tar spot.
Maybe just get through a few more here. Can we go back to irrigation one more time? Mm-hmm. Recommendations for applying a fungicide through irrigation.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention the chemigation. So I think in terms of fungicide timing, in terms of chemigation through the pivot, you want to, you know, follow similar sort of timing practices. You want to be putting it on somewhere between R1 and R3, again, depending on disease pressure. We had excellent disease suppression from chemigation that we ran with the grower at Decatur on some of his fields. I don't have the yield data from him. I need to bug him again on that, see if I can get those. I'd expect very similar sort of performance as opposed to us backpacking or having an aircraft come in. He's a really good operator. So the really important pieces are here. You've got to make sure you're actually set up for chemigation. If you're not set up properly for chemigation, you might be wasting a lot of money. So the problem with chemigation is you need to put on a very small amount of water. It only takes 7/100ths of an inch to wet that corn canopy. After that, you're going to get moisture running off the leaves and down into the soil. If that's happening, you're losing a lot of your product down onto the soil. So you're going to want to run that pivot quickly to put down a 1/10. I think the labels might be up to 2/10 of an inch of water down. Any more than that, and you're going to be wasting product and not getting the fungicide on the leaves where you want them, right? That's probably the most important thing. The second piece is making sure that you've done a uniformity test, making sure your pivot's running uniformly. That's really important. You don't want to put a whole bunch of product on one area and not another. And then just make sure you've got some cutoff valves and all those correct backflow prevention devices and everything that you're required to by law. But yes, it's a great potential and something that we will do again this coming season. And I'll try and get that yield data out of that cooperator so we can talk about too.
Let's talk about early infestation. If we have a field that is early infested and decide to go with 2 passes, should we use 2 different chemistries? And if so, should we use mixed chemistries both times?
I think it'd be better for disease resistance management, sure. I understand the economics though, like if you have a product, a single mode of action product that's a lot cheaper, I can certainly understand, you know, putting that down maybe as the first pass and then coming back with a mixed mode of action. So if I was going to break things up, that's how I do it. Maybe a Strobe at that very first application and then coming back with a mixed mode of action product. Mm-hmm.
We have just a few more questions left in the Q&A if you're open to continue on, Marty.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Have you seen any correlation between corn plant population and soil type with disease onset or severity?
We haven't. I think, you know, well, for example, this, you know, Decatur's on a very, very sandy soil. I've seen it on much heavier soils too. We're on a K-back loam at campus there. That's shown in blue. Again, I think I think what's really important, actually what I should do is go back to my map. I think the most important thing as to why we've seen task spot develop at different levels in different locations is just been where the disease started and where most of that disease pressure is. So it was in 2016, I think, we found task spot in Allegan County. Prior to that, I think it was 2015, it was found in Indiana and Illinois, just in the northern part of those states. And so it's really sort of had this concentration around Southern Lake Michigan. But as you can see, it's blown out from there, right? So it was 2019 that Iowa lit up most of the state with findings all the way across to the other side of the state. But it was very, very low incidences. Most of the pressure, thinking about Michigan alone, is on the west side, west and central part of the state. Sounded like there's a couple of fields in Saginaw that were lit up pretty heavily. Very, very, very low pressure in Huron, but that's going to change over time. My concern with folks up in the thumb is that, we might get more lake effect weather there, and that certainly might drive disease with those leaf moisture events. I lost track of the question, so hopefully that was answering that.
I think you answered that one. I think we'll just go with one more question, Marty. Mm-hmm. Is there a correlation between rate of growth of the corn leaf and tar spot?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say no. We've seen it all the way up into the tassels as well. So I don't think there's really been any rate of growth and infection. The fungus is its own organism, right? It needs that corn plant definitely, but I think essentially whenever you've got green corn leaves, it's got the potential to infect. And as I said, we've seen it explode last year up into the tassels. So wherever there's green, we don't really see it too much on the stalk itself, but certainly anywhere on the leaves, and as I said, on the tassels as well, we've seen it develop there.
Marty, thank you for taking some time to answer all of these wonderful questions. I hope people were able to get things out of those answers, and I appreciate your detailed slides as well. I'm going to hand it back to Terry now.
Kristen, thank you very much. That was very interesting. Marty, just I'm kind of curious. A lot of our producers work with crop scouts, agronomists on a regular basis, and in some cases weekly or even daily. How up on a lot of this research is our crop scouts, our agronomists? Where are they in this communication process right now?
Yeah, I think they're pretty well versed in that. I don't know how many task spot talks I've given over the last couple of years. But yeah, we did agronomy update, that was in mid-December. We had 300 people at that meeting, and that includes a lot of agribusiness personnel. And I certainly, get invited out to those industry sort of groups. And so it's been certainly a hot topic, I guess. So I think they're pretty well versed in it.
Well, that's good, because obviously there's a lot of research coming in, and we really appreciate all the research that you folks have done so far, and keep up the good work, because obviously we're going to be looking at a pretty aggressive campaign this year when it comes to growing corn, given the price structure and everything else that's going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
So again, we really appreciate your research, and we really appreciate you being available
to
answer questions.
Yeah.
If someone would like to be in contact direct with you, Marty, how would we go about doing that?
By all means, let me put my contact information up. All right, so you've got my email address and my Twitter handle there as well. I can type my cell phone number up there as well. It's always a bit dangerous, but I can do that for you all.
Yeah, there you go. Very good. Marty, thank you again very much. We really appreciate it. What a great way to kick off Coffee with Corn. And again, we're going to have 11 more sessions, folks, so stay tuned. We'll keep you on top of exactly what's coming up on a weekly basis. You can do that by going to the corn growers website and getting an update on all of that. Now, if you're watching us via Zoom, we do have some poll questions that'll be coming up on your on the screen right now. We will be ending the stream on Facebook only at this time. So we want to say to those folks, thank you very much for watching with us. We really appreciate your attention. And come again next Tuesday. We're going to do the same thing with a different specialist, and we'll tell you who that's going to be in just a moment. Again, if you're watching on Zoom, hang tight for the RUP and the CCA credit information, okay? So again, thank you very much for joining us this week. Our edition of Coffee with Corn brought to you by the Corn Marketing Program here in Michigan. Now, the Michigan Corn Growers Association members who are listening to return the surveys that were sent out to you. Either you received them in the mail or email. Those surveys need to be in the possession of the Corn Promotion Committee by January the 25th. Now, members should have received, again, as I said, the survey by mail or by email. So again, closing poll up on your screen. We'd really appreciate you getting us that information. Now, next week, we've been teasing you, but next week, we're going to talk about grain marketing and report impacts. There's a government report that's coming out next week, and our program next Tuesday will cover some of the impacts of that report, as well as giving you the latest information on grain marketing with Lou DeGrant from the Cooperative Elevator Company. Now, to register, review the full schedule of upcoming events, again, that website is www.micorn.org/events. I'm Terry Henney on behalf of the Corn Promotion Committee here in Michigan. We want to thank you for being with us today and have a great day.